Hi, and welcome to lessons 8 and 9 for the quadratic functions unit. There is really only just one lesson, but we will practice it over 2 days. So the lesson's on converting between quadratic function forms. So last class, or video, we talked about the different forms for quadratic functions. We looked at factored form, standard form, and vertex form. And we saw some of the advantages. Vertex form allows us to read the vertex right off of it. Factored form gives us clues as to what the x-intercepts or the zeros are. So you need to know how to convert from one form to another based on the information that you want. So if you have something in standard form but you need the vertex, you need to be able to go to vertex form. If you have something in vertex form and you need the x-intercepts, you need to be able to get to factored form. So 3 forms of quadratic equations. So far, we have learned 3 different forms of quadratic functions. The characteristics of parabolas can be determined using the equation of the quadratic function. You must be familiar with switching back and forth between the 3 forms of the function. So here we have our 3 forms. And there's different procedures to go from here to here and here to here and so on and so forth. But you want to kind of know this order. It's easiest to go from factor to standard and then from standard to vertex, or from vertex to standard and from standard to factored. So we're going to number these 4 processes. So this is the first process where we're going from factored form to standard form, which we see here. So converting from factored form to standard form is quite easy. Essentially what you're going to do is expand the equation using FOIL and simplify. In other words, it's a regular multiplication problem with a multiplication polynomial problem. Essentially, you have a number being multiplied by these factors. So essentially what you want to do is do FOIL. So here, don't forget to copy down the fx. Remember, we're not affecting that in any way, so you just copy it down. Right now, we're going to leave the -3 as is, and we're going to do FOIL for these brackets. So remember, that's just x times x, which is x squared, x times 5 plus 5x, 3 times x plus 3x, and 3 times 5 plus 15. Take some time now to look at what you've written and see if you can simplify it any further. So what I see automatically is I can collect these like terms. So I have x squared, and 5x plus 3x gives me 8x plus 15. We're still not in standard form yet because we still have a bracket. To get rid of the bracket, we're going to multiply the term on the outside by every single term on the inside of the bracket. So we have -3 times x squared, which is -3x squared, -3 times 8x, -24x, and -3 times 15, -45. And now we have our equation in standard form. So to go from factored to standard form, it's quite easy. It's just multiply out everything in factored form. Let's call this process number 2. So going from factored form to standard form was 1. Standard form to factored form is number 2. So converting from standard form to factored form, we want to essentially factor the equation. This includes removing the greatest common factor. So greatest common factor first, and then do a difference of squares or trinomial factoring, depending on which equation you are left with. So remember, the rule for all factoring is start with the greatest common factor. So take a look at this question. What is the greatest common factor between 2x squared, 10x, and 12? You should be thinking 2. So we're going to remove the 2, open up the brackets. We know that whatever terms we write here, they should multiply with the 2 to give us the terms up here. So 2 times what gives us 2x squared? Well, x squared. 2 times what gives us 10x? That's just going to be positive 5x. And 2 times what gives us 12? Positive 6. We're left with this situation where we have a lone number and a trinomial. So we can continue factoring using trinomial factoring. So remember with trinomial factoring, because the 2 is not being affected, I just copied it down, and we need 2 brackets. So the first term in each bracket multiplies to give us x squared, which is x and x. The second term in each bracket multiplies to give us 6. Again, if there are multiple options, so 1 times 6, 2 times 3, we go with the closer options first. So 2, 3. The inside smiley gives us 2x, and the outside smiley gives us 3x. Again, we have to put signs in front of these so that both of these add up to give us positive 5x. Well, that's just positive 2x and positive 3x. So we're left with x plus 2 and x plus 3. So essentially, this is our answer in factored form. So going from factored to standard and standard to factored, these are using tools that you already have. To go from factored to standard, essentially we're multiplying it out. To go from standard to factor, all we're doing is we're taking our initial equation and we're factoring it as much as we can. So let's call this number 3, going from standard to vertex form, and going from vertex to standard form as number 4. We're actually going to start with 4 first because it's easier. It's using a tool that we already have. So converting from vertex to standard form, expand the equation again using FOIL and simplify. So what you should notice is regardless of what form you're in, whether you're factored or vertex, to get to standard form, it's just purely multiplication and FOIL. It's to go from standard to factored and to go from standard to vertex that requires special processes. So again, the fx is not affected here, so copy it as is. Remember, I've said that if you have x plus 3 or a bracket squared, we should always rewrite that as x plus 3, x plus 3. Again, I'm not doing anything with the plus 1, so I'm going to copy it as is. What I notice now is I have 2 brackets being multiplied, so I can use FOIL. Keep in mind that when you do this, the negative is still there, it's not being affected, but you want to open up a bracket to put your answers from the FOIL always. So we have x times x, x squared, x times 3, 3x, 3 times x, another 3x, and 3 times 3, 9. Once again, the plus 1 where we haven't been affected by it, so we're just going to write it down as is. We can continue to simplify, so inside the bracket, I can collect these 2 terms, which leaves me with x squared, 3x plus 3x, 6x, plus 9, and a plus 1 off to the side. What I see here is I'm still not in standard form. I still have this pesky bracket here. I want to get rid of it. So again, I see that in front of the bracket is a negative, and remember that just means there's a negative 1, so I can multiply it out. So I have negative 1 times x squared, which is negative x squared, negative 1 times 6x, negative 6x, and negative 1 times 9, negative 9 plus 1. I'm still not done. I still see that there are like terms I can collect here. So f of x is equal to negative x squared, negative 6x, and minus 9 plus 1 will give me negative 8. And I'm finally in standard form. Now to go from standard to vertex, so this is process 3, this is what the entire lesson today is on. I need to do a process called completing the square. And completing the square is a very hard process, hard in the sense that it's long. There are a lot of steps to remember in order to get it right. So let's go to the bottom of the page, which describes those steps. And I do want to change this question so that it's an easier first example to show you. So we're going to change the middle 6 here to a 12. So the equation is fx is equal to 2x squared plus 12x plus 12. So we're just going to follow the steps that have been provided here. Steps for completing the square: factor out a from the first 2 terms, leave some space in the factor bracket, keep C to the far right. What does this all mean? We know what common factoring is. I would take a look at 2, 12, and 12, and I would say the common factor is 2, so I'm going to pull it out. When you're completing the square, it's not, again, I repeat, it's not the same as common factoring. Essentially, what you're always going to do is you're going to factor out the a value, or the value in front of the x squared. So in this case, we're going to factor out the 2. But you don't factor out the 2 from everything, only from the first 2 terms. So let's open our bracket. 2 times what gives us 2x squared? Well, x squared. And 2 times what gives us 12x? That's going to be positive 6x. So we factored out a from the 2 terms. It says leave some space in the factor bracket. So you're going to leave a lot of empty space here. And keep the c to the far right. So this is your c value, the value from which we have not factored anything out. So you're just going to write it as is along the side. Step 2, using the new b value, find b divided by 2 squared. So just a recap, if I have something in standard form, so this equation, the b is whatever value is attached to my x. In this case, my b value is equal to 6. So we're going to do this on the side. It says, using your new b value, find b divided by 2 squared. So we'll write that down, b divided by 2 squared. And in this case, our b is a 6. So 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is just 9. So using our b, we found b divided by 2 squared. We're going to add and subtract that number in the factor bracket. So b divided by 2 squared gave us 9. We're going to add 9 in the bracket. We're also going to subtract 9 in the bracket. 4, remove the negative b over 2 squared. So remove the negative 9 in this case from the bracket by multiplying it out with a. So we have all of these things in a bracket, and we know that if we want to get things out of the bracket, we have to take 2 and multiply it by every single thing in the bracket. But in this case, we don't want to take everything out of the bracket. We only want to take negative 9 out of the bracket, but we follow the same rule. We're going to multiply by 2 to take it out of the bracket. So here, we're going to keep the 2. We want our x squared plus 6x plus 9 within our bracket, but we want the negative 9 out. So negative 9 times 2 is negative 18 plus 12. So we're getting closer and closer to factored form. So after we do that, it says simplify the equation by factoring the perfect trinomial and adding or subtracting the constant value. So there's 2 things to do here, and I'm going to do it in 2 steps. So you're going to have this part opened because that's a trinomial. We're going to factor it. And the constants on the end, you're just going to add at the end. So negative 18 plus 12 is just negative 6. We have this, we want to factor it. We're going to treat it like any other factoring question. So because it's a trinomial, to get to x squared, I'm going to have x and x. To get to 9, again, I can have 3 and 3. If I do my double smiley, this is 3x. This is also 3x. I need to put signs in front of them, add up to give me 6x. So I'm going to put a plus and a plus. So I have a plus here and a plus there. Eventually, the final answer that I get is I have this 2. I have x plus 3 times x plus 3. So the proper way of writing that is x plus 3 squared, and the minus 6 will stay on the side. So like I said, it's not a hard process because you know the math, and the math is quite simple. It's hard because there's a constant number of, or a large number of steps to remember. I also did a harder example here so that you can see what you'll eventually be able to do On the next page, we're going to start with easier examples and build our way to these harder examples. So just give me a few seconds. So let's complete this exercise. It says complete the square for the following equations to convert them into vertex form, then state the vertex and equation of axis of symmetry for each function. Well, I'm going to do B, D, as well as, there are multiple D's at the bottom of the page. So I'm going to do B, D, and E with you. And you're going to do A, C, and F, and then send them to me via our Google Classroom. So let's take a look at B. So we're going to follow the exact same steps that were presented on the previous page. So if you need to refer back to them, please do. So the first step is we are going to factor out the A value from the first two terms. So here, the A value is 1. Because there's no actual value there, we know that it's just 1x squared. So we're going to factor out a 1. When we factor out a 1, well, 1 times what gives us x squared? That's just x squared. And 1 times what gives us 4x? That's just plus 4x. So we factor out the 1 from the first two terms, then leave a lot of space and write down the c value, the plus 2. So that's all step 1. Step 2, it says using the new b value, find b over 2 squared. So remember, the b value is the value that's attached to the x. So in this case, our b value is 4. So let's do it off to the side. It's always b divided by 2 squared. The b value is 4, so 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is just 4. So the b divided by 2 squared value is 4. So what you're going to do is you're going to add 4 and subtract 4 in the bracket. So that's step 3. Remember, the value, so you're going to add and subtract by the same value. The add must come first. The subtract comes next because we essentially want to take the subtract one out of the bracket. So we're going to leave it to the end. So that's easier to take out. Then we move on to step 4. It says remove the negative b over 2 squared, so in this case negative 4 value, by multiplying it out with a. So let's copy down everything we have. So we know the a value is unaffected. Keep these first 3 things inside a bracket, so let's keep it in our bracket. It's the negative 4 that we do not want in our bracket, but again, to take it out of the bracket, we need to multiply by the 1. So 1 times negative 4 is just negative 4 plus 2. And in our last step, remember, there's actually 2 different things that we need to do. We need to take this trinomial and factor it. So let me open up the brackets for that. And we're just going to take these lone values and add them. So negative 4 plus 2 is just negative 2. So I'm left with x squared plus 4x plus 4, and I need to factor this. So again, these two terms will be x and x, because x and x gives me x squared. My next 2 terms have to multiply to give me 4, so 2 and 2. If I do my double smiley, here I have 2x, here I have 2x. I could put signs in front of them so that they add to give me plus 4x. So plus 2 and plus 2. So x plus 2 and x plus 2. We're still not done, however, because we realize that because we have 2 of the same factor, which you will always have when you're doing this process, we can rewrite this as x plus 2 squared. So if at the end you don't have x plus or minus something squared, you know you've made a mistake. These 2 factors should always be the same. The negative 2 is untouched, so I'm going to copy it down. Something to keep in mind, this kind of looks funky because we never really write a 1 in front of just brackets. So you can kind of cross it out. That means the exact same thing. You still have 1 of the x plus 2 squared. And this is your final answer. But we are not done the question because they also wanted us to state the vertex. So looking at this, the vertex, so remember that's the h and the k value. The h here is positive 2. I take the opposite, negative 2. And the k value here is negative 2. So my vertex is negative 2, negative 2. I also want the equation of the axis of symmetry. So remember to do that, all you do is you look at the x variable of the vertex. So we write x is equal to the x variable of the vertex, which is negative 2. So again, those are the 5 steps you're always going to follow to complete the square. Let's move on to D now. We're going to follow the exact same process, but it's going to be slightly different. So we have g of x here. Follow the exact same procedure. The first step was we need to factor out our a value from the first 2 terms. So take a look at this. In front of x squared, we have a negative, which is really a negative 1. So that's the factor, that's the value that I'm going to factor out. The a value is a negative 1, so I'm going to factor out the negative 1. So negative 1 times what gets me negative x squared? Well, that's just x squared. And negative 1 times what gives me positive 12x. So think about this. Think about it again. So we have 1. We want to get to 12x. So I'm going to put 12x here. So 1 times 12x is 12x. But I have a negative here, and I want to go to a positive. So this must also be a negative. So I factored out the a value from the first 2 terms, leave that huge gap, and copy down the c value. Then for step 2, we're going to take our new b value and calculate b over 2 squared. So if I take a look here, my b value is the value attached to the x. What is that value? You should say negative 12. So don't forget the signs when you're taking your b value. The b value is negative 12. So if I do negative 12, the b value divided by 2 squared. Negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6 squared, and negative 6 squared is the same thing as negative 6 times negative 6, which is positive 36. So because positive 36 is my b over 2 squared value, I'm going to add 36. Remember, the add comes first, and subtract 36 as well. So that brings me to the end of step 3. Again, I don't want the negative 36 within the brackets. I'm going to take it out by multiplying it with the a value. So what I'm left with is negative 1, which I want, x squared minus 12x plus 36. So remember, the first 3 terms I want in the bracket, but the negative 36 I don't. So I multiply it out by a. Negative 36 times negative 1 is positive 36. And the positive 2 I just copied down. Again, for that last step here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy down the a value because that's not affected. I know I need to factor this, and it's a trinomial, so I'm going to have 2 brackets, and I'm just going to add the 2 terms at the end. So 36 plus 2 is 38. Now to factor this, I have x squared, so x and x. Here I have 36. The closest numbers that multiply to give me 36 are 6 and 6. If I take a look here, this smiley gives me 6x. This smiley gives me 6x. Now I need to add signs so that both of these terms add to give me negative 12x. So I'm going to do negative 6x and negative 6x to give me this answer. Again, because both of these factors are the same, you know you're on the right track. And you can write your final answer. So we have a negative 1. We have 2 of these, so we write x minus 6 squared plus 38. Again, we don't usually write in the negative 1, so you should ideally just write negative x minus 6 squared plus 38. So you have to leave the negative in there because that's relevant, but we usually don't write in the actual number 1. So again, we can answer the related questions. There's the question of what the vertex is. So if I take a look at the vertex, it's, again, the opposite of this. So 6, 38. And the equation for the axis of symmetry is, remember, just the x-coordinate of the vertex, so x is equal to 6. I'm going to show you one last example where it gets a bit more difficult, but again, following the exact same steps. So let's do, you know what? I'm going to do F with you, and then I want you to try A, C, and E on your own. So let's look at this. It says g of x is equal to 3x squared plus 12x plus 2. Same steps as before. I'm just going to switch the colors to make it more interesting this time. Okay, so g of x. So you take a look at this. Your a value is 3. We're always just factoring out our a value. So we're going to factor out the 3. I'm just going to factor out the 3. So 3 times what gives us 3x squared? Well, that's just x squared. And 3 times what gives us 12x? That's just positive 4x. So again, 3 times x squared, 3x squared. 3 times 4x, 12x. Leave a huge space and copy down the plus 2. So same thing as before. Then we get to step 2, where we need to find our b over 2 squared value. So b over 2 squared. Again, the b value is what's attached to the x. So 4 divided by 2 squared. That's just 2 squared, which is equal to 4. So what we do with that is, again, we have to add and subtract it, remembering that the adding has to come first. So plus 4 minus 4. Again, same things as before. Next, we want to take the negative 4 out of the bracket, but we can't just pull it out. We need to multiply it by the a value. So let's do all of that. The x squared plus 4x and plus 4 I want within the bracket, so I'm going to keep it. But the negative 4 I want out. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. And I'm going to add the 2 here. Continuing on. Now I'm at my last step where I have the 3, which is untouched. I have a trinomial, so I need to factor it. And I need to add these terms at the end. So 2 negative 12 is just negative 10. And here I need to factor these. So x squared is just x and x. 4 is just 2 and 2. I'll do this double smiley, so 2x and 2x. I'm going to put the little circles in front of them because these need to add to get me to 4x. And to get to positive 4x, I'm going to have positive 2x and positive 2x. So a plus here and a plus there. Again, to write your final answer, copy the 3. These are the same, so you know you're on the right track. I can rewrite them as x plus 2 squared, and then just write minus 10 at the end. And this is your final answer. Why do we keep the 3 here? Because it's a 3. The only time you can get rid of the number there is if it's a 1, where we really don't have to write a 1. And if it's a negative 1, again, you can erase the 1, but the negative must stay. If it's any other number, it better be there. Okay, so answering the questions, vertex, we take a look at this. The opposite of this is negative 2 and negative 10, so that's the vertex. And the equation of the axis of symmetry, again, we look at the x variable of the vertex, so x is equal to negative 2. So what I want you to do is I want you to try A, C, and E on your own, take a picture of it, send it to me, and I also want you to try this homework. Thank you.